The dream in Margaret Thatcher's Britain was a thriving private sector, and just as council houses were being sold to working class and lower middle class people so they could buy their own homes for the first time very often, she also wanted people to go into self-employment, to become entrepreneurs, to start their own businesses. That, she said, was the route to a different kind of society, a different kind of economy. That orthodoxy has been carried on ever since then, hasn't it, with John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and even David Cameron. The message being a simple one, that if you strive rather than skive, you can get on, and that Britain should be a country built on self-reliance, grit and hard work. The only problem with that is that wages, which, as I've said before, have fallen in Britain more than almost anywhere else in the developed world, 10.4% since 2009, unbelievable statistic. For the self-employed, it's even worse. There was a report out from the Resolution Foundation, a London-based think tank, just this week, which said that the real pay, this inflation-adjusted pay of the average person who's self-employed is lower now than it was 20 years ago. So in 94-95, it was around £300 a week. Now, over 20 years later, it's £240 a week. Annualised, how much is that? £12,500 a year. That's less than half the median household salary. That's £26,000 a year. That's how we calculate the average household wage. And guess what? That puts them in poverty. It puts them in work poverty, right? So pay for people who are self-employed falling. Just as bad is the fact that self-employment is never a larger part of the overall British labour market. It's grown by 45% since 2001. The Tories have failed in pretty much every single category in regards to the economy. One thing they can say is, look, we've created jobs. Sure, they have created jobs. Only problem being, since 2010, most have been self-employed. Often it's outsourcing. It's not just the freelancer entrepreneur stuff, often in London and often in poverty. And you can say what you like about the importance of work, but you can't call it a poverty reduction strategy if being in work full-time means you're still living in poverty. Another statistic from 2010-11, 67% of Londoners who are working full-time, self-employed, 67% were earning less than somebody who was on the London living wage and working full-time. So in 2010, so 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that was calculated to be £15,100 a year. 67% of self-employed Londoners were earning less than that then. If this has followed national trends since then, and by the way, I've spoken to people from the Resolution Foundation, they say there's a real lag on this data. We haven't really got anything for the last 18 months, but if you look at all the other trends, if it correlates, that figure probably rises now to around 75%. So 3/4 of Londoners who are self-employed, 3/4, likely, if anything that's a conservative number, are earning less than somebody who's working full-time, i.e. 40 hours a week on the London living wage. Effectively, they aren't earning enough to live. Make no mistake about it, since 2007, the British economy has suffered a lost decade. On declining wages, down 10.4%, on stagnant productivity, on GDP per capita, up 1% since 2007. Even on the deficit, the thing the Tories want to be judged upon, guess what? It's still £70 billion. George Osborne accumulated more debt as British Chancellor than all his predecessors put together. The one exception to that, and look, the Tories aren't lying about this, they're actually being honest for once, is employment. Okay, unemployment's down, labour participation's up, the number of people in work is at an all-time high. Now, why is that? Well, it's because many of those jobs are precarious, they're low productivity, they're low pay. Many of those jobs are in poverty, hence why just a couple of years ago we saw a big shift in the British economy, didn't we? More people are now in poverty and working than not working. To be poor in Britain often means you're going out to work, full-time job, and still suffering, still not making ends meet. What's more, it's premised on outsourcing. Much of this job creation in the private sector since 2010 is outsourcing. Now, what is outsourcing? They'll tell you it's about improving services. They'll tell you it's about bringing efficiency. It's not. You think Capita know the first thing about army recruitment, or that Serco know the first thing about cleaning university libraries? They know nothing about it. The point is, it's about smashing pay. But the issue for the self-employed, for the outsourced, isn't just their pay has been hit harder than anybody else, and everybody's pay has been hit hard, them most of all. It's also that they don't get things like sick pay, they don't get holiday pay, they don't get pensions. They can often be sacked at the drop of a hat. Often they don't even know their co-workers. Take the gig economy, things like Uber, things like Deliveroo. There's not even the possibility of organising collectively, although Deliveroo have defied that logic in recent months. If we want to challenge poverty in Britain, like I say, that is characterised now by being in work, we have to start with the self-employed, with the freelancers, with the outsourced, with the gig economy. Now, how do we do that? Because we can't just say, give them a living wage, unionize all of them. Often that's not possible. Well, we have to think really smart about this. First thing, we have to insource all outsourced workers currently operating in the public sector. Bring them all back in-house. The cleaners at the SOAS, the security staff in NHS hospitals, you name it, all have to be brought back in. Furthermore, through procurement in the public sector, bring up their wages. And you know what? That'll have an impact across the entire country because the public sector is still such a big employer in Britain. So the first one is bringing in-house, getting rid of outsourcing, discrediting it completely as a way of doing business in Britain. Secondly, we need to think about the social wage for those who are freelancers and entrepreneurs. So there's the wage you take home, but there's also the wage you get through things like healthcare or through education. But we need to understand that this social wage for self-employed needs to be increased, that their access to education, healthcare, housing, transport should either be very cheap or, I think, free at the point of consumption. Furthermore, it should invigorate a debate around a guaranteed social wage. Look, if this is the kind of economy we're moving to, we probably need this thing. But we also have to understand that a guaranteed social wage or a universal basic income is actually probably quite damaging unless we also have free housing, free education, free healthcare, and probably free transport, I think. If we don't have those things accustoming it, it will be nothing more than the full marketisation of the welfare state. Finally, I think we need to think bigger about what kind of economy we want. It's clear that we've had a lost decade. I think we're almost certainly going to have another one. The big question then is, if we want to get rid of poverty, if we want people to have meaningful, productive lives, if we want a new kind of economy, what do we replace this failed free market ideology with? You could call it socialism. I'd call it fully automated luxury communism.